Captain Sir William Hoste, 1st Baronet KCB RN, Royal Navy Captain, was the son of Dixon Hoste, rector of Godwick and Tittleshall in Norfolk. He was born at Ingoldisthorpe, and the family later moved to Godwick Hall, east of Tittleshall, which was leased from Thomas Coke, who later became the first Earl of Leicester of Holkham Hall. Although perhaps best known as one of Lord Nelson's protégés, Hoste was one of the great frigate captains of the Napoleonic Wars, taking part in 6 major actions, including the capture of a heavily fortified port. He was however absent from Trafalgar, having been sent with gifts to the Dey of Algiers. The Hoste Hotel in Burnham Market, Norfolk, is such named after William Hoste and features a Lord Nelson Museum tribute. Childhood and education. Hoste was educated for a time at King's Lynn and later at the Puston School in North Walsham, where Horatio Nelson himself had been to school some years previously. Dixon Hoste had arranged for Hoste's name to be entered in the books of HMS Europa as a captain's servant when he was just 5 years old, although he would not actually go to sea until he reached the age of 12 or 13. The time coincided with the outbreak of war with France in February 1793. Lacking any influence or naval contacts himself, Dixon Hoste asked his landlord, Thomas Coke, for assistance and was introduced to Nelson, then living nearby in Burnhamthorpe and who had recently been appointed as captain of HMS Agamemnon, a 64-gun third rate, which was being fitted out at Chatham Dockyard. Early career. HMS Agamemnon. Nelson accepted Hoste to join him as a captain's servant on HMS Agamemnon, which he boarded at Portsmouth at the end of April 1793. The ship joined the Mediterranean fleet under Lord Hood, and it was in the Mediterranean and Adriatic that Hoste saw most of his naval service. Extracts from Nelson's letters to his wife mention Hoste frequently. For example, "Without exception one of the finest boys I ever met with, and his gallantry never can be exceeded, and each day rivets him stronger to my heart." Another captain servant on Agamemnon was Josiah Nisbet, Nelson's stepson, but the letters suggest that Hoste quickly became a favorite and that Josiah compared badly with him in many respects. Hoste was promoted to midshipman by Nelson on the 1st of February 1794 and served with him during the blockade of and subsequent assault on Corsica on 7 February. HMS Captain and the Battle of Cape St. Vincent. Hoste moved with Nelson to HMS Captain in 1796 and was with him at the Battle of Cape St. Vincent, when a British fleet under Admiral Sir John Jervis defeated a Spanish fleet almost twice its size. Captain was heavily involved in the fighting and captured the larger San Joseph and San Nicholas of 112 and 80 guns, respectively. Captain started the battle towards the rear of the British line. Instead of continuing to follow the line, Nelson disobeyed orders and warship, and made for the Spanish van, which consisted of the 112-gun San Joseph, the 80-gun San Nicholas and the 130-gun Santissima Trinidad. Captain engaged all 3, assisted by HMS Culloden, which he had come to her aid. After an hour of exchanging broadsides which left both Captain and Culloden heavily damaged, Nelson found himself alongside the San Nicholas, which he boarded and forced her surrender. San Joseph attempted to come to the San Nicholas's aid, but became entangled with her compatriot and was left immobile. Nelson led his party from the deck of the San Nicholas onto the San Joseph and captured her as well. Hms Theseus. In June 1797, he transferred to HMS Theseus, a 74-gun third-rate. Theseus was a troubled ship, and Nelson and a few hand-picked officers, including Hoste, Captain Ralph Willard Miller and Lieutenant John Weatherhead, were sent aboard to restore order. The tactic was successful and Nelson received a letter from the would-be mutineers which stated, "We thank the Admiral signal for the officers he has placed over us. In July, Theseus was present at the Battle of Santa Cruz de Tenerife, although Hoste remained aboard and took no part in the assault. Following the death of a Lieutenant Weatherhead in the battle, Nelson promoted Hoste to lieutenant to fill the vacancy, his position being confirmed, thanks to his book Time in Europa, in February 1798. The Battle of the Nile. Later that year, Hoste, still aboard HMS Theseus, was at the Battle of the Nile. The Royal Navy fleet was outnumbered, at least in firepower, by the French fleet, which boasted the 118-gun ship of the line L'Orient, 3 80-gun warships and 9 of the popular 74-gun ships. The Royal Navy fleet in comparison had just 13 74-gun ships and 1 50-gun fourth rate. Nevertheless, the battle was a decisive victory for the British. Following the battle, Nelson sent his report to London, taking the precaution of sending a duplicate in the brig HMS Mutin, commanded by Lieutenant Thomas Capel. At Naples, Capel was to carry on with the dispatch, handing command of Mutin to Hoste. Upon taking command, Hoste became an acting captain at the age of 18. Hoste, carrying news of the victory, first sailed to Gibraltar, before rejoining the fleet under St. Vincent off Cadiz. His promotion was confirmed in December 1798. Command. Hoste continued in command of the Mutin for the next 3 years, campaigning in Italy under Nelson, where in the autumn of 1799, he took part in the capture of Rome. He later served under Lord Keith, who knew little of him, and his career appeared to have stalled until, possibly at Nelson's prompting, he was promoted post-captain by Lord St. Vincent, First Lord of the Admiralty, in January 1802. At this time, Hoste was in Alexandria, where he contracted malaria and then a lung infection, which were to have a lasting effect on his health. He convalesced with Lord and Lady Elgin in Athens, where he began an education in classical antiquity, completed following his appointment to the frigate HMS Greyhound in Florence, when his ship was cruising on the Italian coast. Hoste served almost continuously throughout the Peace of Amiens, returning to England briefly in April 1803 before being given command of HMS Eurydice in October. Notable actions. Nelson summoned him to Cadiz in September 1805 and gave him command of the 32-gun frigate HMS Amphion. Sent on a diplomatic mission to Algiers, he missed the Battle of Trafalgar by a matter of days, and only learned of Nelson's death on his return in November. He wrote to his father, "Not to have been in it is enough to make one mad, but to have lost such a friend besides is really sufficient to almost overwhelm me." A number of successes while engaged on active service in the Mediterranean over the following 18 months brought Hoste to the attention of Lord Collingwood, who sent him into the Adriatic Sea. Here he single-handedly conducted an aggressive campaign against enemy shipping and coastal installations, bringing coastal trade with the enemy more or less to a halt. By the end of 1809, Hoste and his crew had captured or sunk over 200 enemy ships. His endeavors were rewarded with command, as Commodore, of a small detachment of frigates, comprising HMS Amphion, HMS Active, HMS Voyage and HMS Cerberus. Operations continued, and by establishing a base at Lissa, now known as Viz, Hoste was able to dominate the Adriatic with just 4 ships. In March and April 1810 alone, they took and destroyed 46 vessels. The French and their allies became so frustrated by the disruption to the shipping that a Franco-Venetian squadron, under the command of an aggressive frigate commander named Bernard d'Abourdieu, was dispatched, and on the 13th of March 1811 they attacked Hoste's small fort in what became known as the Battle of Lissa. Battle of Lissa. Algiers squadron of 7 frigates and 4 smaller warships possessing a total of 276 guns and nearly 2,000 men, significantly outnumbered Hoste with his 4 frigates mounting only 124 guns and manned by less than 900 men. The French officer imitated Nelson's attack at Trafalgar by sailing down on the English line from windward with his ships in 2 lines. However, signaling "Remember Nelson" to rally his men, Hoste used his superior seamanship and gunnery overcame the larger enemy force, with the loss of 50 men killed and 132 wounded. Algiers was killed, 1 of the French frigates was driven on shore, another captured, and 2 of the Venetian frigates were taken. Hoste's signal had a profound effect on his men. It was universally greeted with loud cheers, and Captain Hornby of the Voyage wrote of it later, "Never again so long as I live shall I see so interesting as a glorious moment." Cattero, Spalato and Ragusa Amphion was so badly damaged that she was obliged to return to England, where Hoste was given the command of HMS Bacchante, although he did not return to the Adriatic in her until 1812. Hoste continued to demonstrate the same kind of initiative and aggression as before. He helped capture Spalato in November 1813, with the assistance from the 35th Regiment of Foot. Then, working with Montenegrin forces, he attacked the mountain fortress of Cattero, hauling ships, cannon and mortars to positions above the fort using block and tackle. The French garrison had no alternative but to surrender, which it did on the 5th of January 1814. Hoste immediately repeated these tactics at Ragusa, which also surrendered later on the 27th. Later life. Hoste's health, compromised by his malaria and earlier lung infection, worsened and he was forced to return to England. In 1814, he was made a baronet, and in 1815 he was knighted KCB. In 1817, he married Lady Harriet Walpole, with whom he had 3 sons and 3 daughters. In 1825, he was appointed to the royal yacht Royal Sovereign. In January 1828, he developed a cold which affected his already weakened lungs, and he died of tuberculosis in London on the 6th of December 1828. He was buried in St. John's Chapel, London. Legacy. Hoste's actions at Cattero and Ragusa were later immortalized in fiction, where they are attributed to Captain Jack Aubrey, the principal character in Patrick O'Brien's 20 novels of the Aubrey-Maturin series. A small island in the entrance to the Bay of Vistown is named Hoste Island after him, while the Sir William Hoste Cricket Club in Vis was founded by the Croatian Islanders after learning that he had organized the game during the British occupation of the island. Once, while in conversation with Hoste's father, Nelson remarked, "Lord Radstock once wrote,